and on behalf of Caresoft Technology Corporation, I would like to welcome you to our Solix Technologies webcast, Information Lifecycle Management. Before we begin, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. All of your lines have been muted to reduce background noise, so feel free to use the chat feature on the left side of your screen to submit any questions you may have throughout the presentation. All the questions will be addressed towards the end of the presentation, and if we are unable to get to your question, our team will follow up with you offline. To tell you a little bit about Caresoft, we are a trusted government IT solutions provider, delivering industry-leading technology products, services, and training to federal, state, local, and education customers. On behalf of top-tier manufacturers such as Salesforce.com, HP Software, SAP, VMware, and Adobe. Our contact information will be at the end of the presentation, so please don't hesitate to call us for any of your needs. At this time, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, John Ottman, Executive Chairman at Solix Technologies. John, the floor is all yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Christine. Let me see if I can get my first slide here. My name is John Ottman. I'm Executive Chairman of Solix Technologies, as we're waiting for the presentation to upload. And today we're going to talk about enterprise data management and what exactly does that mean? What are the solutions that are involved with enterprise data management, and how can we get about deploying them and achieving the benefits? So just give our Adobe desktop one more second. There we go. Okay, so enterprise data management. Let's first talk about what's probably the biggest issue on almost any CIO's list of big problems. And every year, Gartner Group creates a report which is the major concerns of CIOs, and data growth becomes number one, number two, or number three for the last 3 years in a row. And there's a good reason why. It's because when data grows, costs grow. And today we're going through a virtual data growth explosion, and it's reached crisis really proportions. Some people have estimated there'll be over 980 exabytes of data created this year, which is got some outrageous suggestions of that being the same as stacking books from here to Pluto and back. It's so much information, and the reason why it's a problem is because it starts requiring it impacts hardware capacity and performance. So as database sizes grow, hardware capacity has to increase so that we can maintain performance. And then we get into an iterative life cycle on this until we're constantly increasing our hardware capacity to maintain performance, and costs get out of control. So we have impacts on database size, it impacts IT resources, it impacts the availability and the downtime that you have on your systems. Obviously, the bigger your database is, the longer it takes to recover. So availability is impacted. There's more data to maintain compliance over. And obviously, risk becomes greater the more data that you have. So underneath everything, data growth is one of the major cost drivers for IT organizations. And if you just think about it for a second, if you have a data center, the more data you have, the more floor tiles you need to store that data, the more CPUs that you need to process that data, the more storage platforms you have to buy, the more electricity that's required. The list of cost drivers is endless based on the amount of data that you have. So the question is, how many copies of this data are we keeping, and how do we manage it in a compliant way? So first thing, let's remember that performance is a huge impact. If your database grows, if it doubles in size, your performance is going to be significantly impacted. It's going to mean you're going to be tuning your databases, you're going to be tuning your SQL queries, and time and effort is going to be spent doing that. Not to mention buying a different additional infrastructure for which drives increased storage costs, longer backup and recovery cycles. Every time you do a full system backup, it can take a long time, and ultimately the backup windows and the recovery cycles that you've planned for, these windows impact production availability. So major issues there. Compliance and legal risks as well. Moving between platforms, say HP UX to Linux, or let's say you're upgrading an Oracle e-business solution from release 11 to release 12. These moves all require conversions of data and moving data from one database to the other, and it takes time, and it creates an outage. So as you're moving data, as you're upgrading, the more data, the longer the outage. And certainly with clones, cloning is one of the most difficult tasks DBAs deal with. It's a very, very important part of running a database to be able to have non-production instances that are representative of your production environment. Typically, clones are one-to-one copy. And so if you have a 1 terabyte database and you have 5 clones, you've got 5 terabytes of storage. So non-production storage can be a huge cost impact as well. So the problems we're solving, it starts with data growth, but then we start to say, okay, well, what are the other approaches to managing this problem? And one is to look at obsolete applications. We call this application retirement or application decommissioning. Many organizations roll out the old system and roll in the new system on a regular basis. What's interesting to observe is that all too often the new system gets rolled in, but the old system doesn't get rolled out. And the reason why sometimes years later you can still find the old system running in the data center is because people need access to the data, because you weren't able to retire the data properly. So managing obsolete applications and decommissioning them properly is a big problem that we're solving. Operational inefficiencies can occur in many different ways, but I mentioned cloning before. So how much non-production storage are you using, and are you really being as efficient with your creation of non-production environments as you may be, because the cost impact is very, very significant there. And then, of course, what about data security? It's a critical requirement within the federal government area that we maintain security in our databases. Database security risk and compliance is a mandate driven by NIST 853 and a host of other different security requirements. And so the more data that we have, the more data we have to keep track of, and the more risk of data breach. So these are a lot of the areas that we're going to talk about today. So just quickly, and I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about technology. I'd really like to focus it on the solution set, but it's important to understand the technology that's underneath our solution here. We call it the Solix EDMS platform, or Enterprise Data Management Suite platform. And essentially, what it is a enterprise platform that supports all databases in the enterprise. We support DB2, Informix, MySQL, Oracle, SQL Server, Sybase, Teradata, a number of mainframe environments, almost every single database that you can think of, we're supporting. And this is very, very important because we want this to be an enterprise solution. And then what the system does first is that it has a classification engine, and it will classify the data in your database. Is this sensitive data? Do we have any regulatory issues with this type of data? Is this production data? data, or is it metadata? Are these indexes, or are these customer names? So classification of your data is a very, very important capability, and it's inherent in the Solix CDMS platform. Secondly, there's a policy engine within the Solix CDMS platform, which allows you to implement the policies for data management that you decide on, which you may require for compliance or even legal reasons. Compliance requirements may suggest that you've got a data retention policy that must be implemented, for instance. And this is the area in the system where we manage the creation of policies and the management of the policies for your data. The business object creator is a very, very important part of the system, because when we're talking about data, we're not necessarily always concerned about data at the block level. And enterprise data management takes the concern for data and really elevates it up to the object level. So, for instance, a business object could be defined as an employee. And so the big question is, what are all the data elements that are associated through, say, referential constraints with the employee? Maybe there's a hiring record. Maybe there's a salary record. Maybe there's a vacation record. Maybe there's a whole host of elements that belong to this object called an employee. And if you're going to be managing the data about this employee, you really need to know everything about that object of the employee. Because if you're going to manage data growth, or if you're going to manage compliance, let's say you have a retention policy, you've got to manage an employee record for maybe a long period of time, many years. You got to make sure that the data that you're managing is all of the data, so you have a complete business object. And then finally, the system needs to be able to monitor itself, so that we know that everything's happening correctly, the policies are executing as we might expect. So using those tool sets, the Solix CDMS platform offers a set of component services. One is archiving, and we're going to talk about database archiving in some detail here. A second is application retirement, which I mentioned briefly, which is the ability to decommission enterprise applications. A third is test data management, which is the ability to subset databases, a cloning alternative. And the fourth is data masking, which is the ability to secure sensitive data within the database. So in addition to having these four main capabilities running across all of the major databases, we've also built knowledge base capabilities for deploying this against major enterprise applications such as the Oracle E-Business Suite, or Siebel, or PeopleSoft, or J.D. Edwards, and many other popular Tier 1 applications. Now, I talked a little bit about the complete business object, and this is really more of an example there. But it's important that when you're deploying a system, let's say we're going to archive an Oracle E-Business Suite, that if we're gonna be looking at the HR function, we're going to be looking at the employee. It's important to understand, as I said before, that all of these entities have several tables that the business objects can span across, and they may involve different table spaces. They may cross partitions. I gave an example of the employee who had other records associated with it. So even the metadata model framework needs to be properly accounted for and properly managed. And what the Solix CDMS solution does is provide a framework to auto-populate these entities, not only for your standard Tier 1 applications, but for custom applications as well. a lot of times when you talk to a user community about archiving their database, or even more owners potentially decommissioning their database, the first response you get from the user community is, well, you can't do that because I need access to the data. And there's a popular misconception out there that archiving or application decommissioning suggests that end users will no longer have access to the data. But it's actually nothing could be further from the truth, because what we're really doing on top of everything else is making sure that we maintain the consistent access to that data, even though the data has been archived or the data has been decommissioned. And we do this through a solution called the Solix Application Portfolio Manager. And this environment is how you have a single query environment which allows you access, so that at any time, whether the data is current data running in the production database, or whether the data is less frequently used, it's always accessible to the end user community. So
Hello?
and archive data. So if you had a query that had to return rows, from both production and archived tables, it would do so transparently to the end user. But then there's typically a third tier, tier 3, which is the data that's not just less frequently used; it's almost never used. Now, there's some compliance requirements that are going to suggest that in this final archive that data should be shredded or destroyed at that point. And so you want to be able to have a life cycle management process that tells you when your data gets to the point where your policy suggests it's time to destroy that data, or if it's moved to tape, or if it's moved to the cloud, or whatever your policy is. And then ultimately, you still want to have access to the information because there's certain compliance requirements within particularly the federal arena that may mean that data needs to be kept for not just 2 or 7 years, but I've actually seen some compliance requirements over 30 years. And therefore, not only do you have to hold the data for that long, you've got to have a technology capability to access the data and retrieve the data 30 years later. So these become difficult challenges, but quite solvable within this construct. So if we think about the benefits of database archiving, and why are we going to do this? It's because you improve your application performance. When your tables get too large, the system slows down and you get poor performance. As my first slide showed, the data growth crisis, you can't just throw hardware at the problem and you can just spend the scarce budget dollars buying bigger and bigger machines and more storage. I've heard some people say storage is cheap. I think maybe the cost per megabyte of storage might be dropping almost all the time, like Moore's Law, but certainly storage is not cheap. The more data that you have, the bigger the driver of your overall cost for everything. So improving application performance is reason number one to benefit database archiving and improve your operations. The smaller your database, the less time it will take to clone a non-production database from your production database. Or you can reduce the downtime for cold backups or upgrades and disaster recovery tests. Reducing costs is huge in all of this equation because tiered storage environments can reduce infrastructure costs by 20 to 50%. You really want all your current data in your tier 1 position, and you're going to use your high performance, more expensive storage platforms there. But your less frequently or almost never frequently accessed data can move to mass storage devices like worm devices, which are much, much cheaper. So there's significant cost savings opportunity here in terms of overall storage costs. And you want to be able to maintain regulatory compliance, understanding what data has legal holds and make sure that you're compliant to those compliance mandates. Talk a minute about application retirement. So this is an interesting statistic that maybe or factoid that some of you probably are already aware of. According to the Federal Data Center Consolidation Initiative, federal agencies have formulated detailed consolidation plans and technical roadmaps to eliminate a minimum of 800 data centers by 2015. It's amazing how many data centers the federal government has that it can eliminate 800. Certainly makes you wonder how much data is in the federal government. But this is a big issue that is going to be driving a lot of interest in application retirement and application decommissioning going further. So, Jim Dugan, the Gartner analyst that follows this market, he suggests that application portfolio rationalization is capable of meaning that 10% of an application portfolio could probably be eliminated, or they're candidates for retirement. So one out of 10 applications in a typical data center could be retired. And the Gartner research goes further to say that between 2010 and 2020, more than half of all data center applications in use will be retired. So that's a lot of applications and lot of data that needs to be properly retired. And why are people doing this? Because it's a great way to reduce costs. When you retire an old application, you're retiring the infrastructure it runs on. You're eliminating the maintenance and support costs of the software that's running it. You're reducing the amount of electricity and network bandwidth and real estate floor space that you're using in your data center. There's just savings everywhere. In fact, 30 years I've worked in the IT business, I don't think I've found a higher return on investment IT application than application retirement. The return on investment here is stunning because you're just flat out eliminating major costs. Now, for the federal data center initiative, data center consolidation is going to drive a lot of this. Application standardization, upgrading new ERPs, consolidating ERP instances into larger instances across multiple divisions, this type of thing. All are great drivers of data center consolidation, and that's how the U.S. federal government's going to have to behave in order to achieve the goal of 800 decommissionings. Regulatory compliance is also tremendous. I was in one federal agency one time, and I was being shown a new healthcare system, and in the system running next to it in the data center was running on a very large mainframe, and that was the old system. And so they were actually running the new system and the old system. The old system was just rumbling away, just providing compliance. In other words, we need access of all these health records because we've got compliance requirements there. So you're really going to do yourself a big favor if you can meet those regulatory compliance objectives without having to run the old system as well as the new system. So the approach for application retirement really starts with classifying your legacy data to be migrated. You want to separate the business relevant data from the system data. In other words, indexes from actual business objects. And then, second thing, you want to migrate that legacy data to an archive. And select an archive based on access requirements. What type of an archive, what sort of database are you gonna put it in? And then you've got to manage your access to that archive in terms of role-based security and access controls, and you want to put a policy framework in place around retention management, legal discovery, be able to assign retention schedules to data objects, apply legal holds with data preservation considerations so that so you'll meet your compliance requirements. This is the general approach. And so if you think about it, you start with your legacy application, and just because you may have a brand new SAP system or a brand new Oracle business system doesn't mean that you're not going to be retiring those platforms, because many times multi-instance deployments get consolidated into single instance deployments, in which case you've now orphaned copies of your information, and those are candidates for application retirement. But you start with your mainframe or custom or packaged applications, and then you take the data and the reports out of those environments, and you retire them using the Solix EDMS application retirement solution, and you create business views using the Solix View Builder. So now we've left the infrastructure and we've left the old software applications behind at this point, and we're moving it into a retired environment. And you start thinking about your data retrieval service levels, and depending on whether or not the data needs to be frequently accessed or occasionally accessed or infrequently or not at all, that's going to determine what your strategy is for your final storage of your legacy data. So if it's frequently access to information, you might want to store it on a relational database archive because that's going to give you the best performance. If it's infrequent, you might want to put it in some sort of a file server content archive repository, maybe worm device. There's also cloud storage alternatives, and all of these are great solutions depending on the specific circumstances of your access requirements. So as a case study, we did a large project for Honeywell. Honeywell, as you know, is a Dow component company, very big company with thousands and thousands of applications, and they went about an enterprise-wide application retirement initiative, which literally was hundreds of databases. It was an ERP-focused target environment. They had years ago had a very decentralized and distributed environment, so they built up a big inventory of old manufacturing systems, including Ask Man and J.D. Edwards, and really probably one of everything that exists. And then they moved to Oracle. And then a few years after they moved everything to Oracle, now they're currently moving everything to SAP. So, and they want to get to the point where they have as few SAP instances as possible. So ultimately, I suppose the ideal case would be they'd have one SAP production ERP instance for the whole company. I don't know if they would ever get there, but that would be the ultimate objective. And as a result, there's literally hundreds of orphaned ERP environments and manufacturing and distribution environments to be retired. And so we've been doing that project for almost 2 years with Honeywell, and the projected cost savings over $12 million over 3 years. So it's a great example of application portfolio rationalization. Let's take a quick look at Solix EDMS test data management. Test data management, I think I said already that application retirement was one of the best IT return on investment solutions that I've seen, but actually I'm going to take that back because I think test data management actually is the best return on investment because it attacks what we call the storage multiplier effect. Now, if you have a production database of 500 gigabytes, and then you start cloning that production database to create non-production instances, such as development or training or performance testing or integration testing, etc. If every time you make a copy of that data, you're using a cloning approach, you're making a complete clone, that means your 500 gigabyte database with 6 non-production instances is actually going to be 3.5 terabytes. So you took your 500 gigabyte database, you multiply it times 6, plus you add the original, you now have 3.5 terabytes of storage stemming from one 500 gigabyte production database. This storage multiplier effect has just ballooned your storage costs. So how do we get around this? How do we deal with this? Well, there's an alternative to cloning, to database cloning, and it's called subsetting. And what subsetting does is it makes syntactically correct copies, but they're subset copies of the original database. So, for instance, you might decide that your testing database only needs to be 200 gigabytes, or your integration testing maybe only needs to be 50 gigabytes. Maybe your sandbox environment only needs to be 25 gigabytes. So you can see if you add these numbers up, it's not going to come close to 3.5 terabytes that the cloned environment had for a total storage footprint. This may reduce your non-production storage requirements by 50 to 80%. So we're looking at significant storage savings this way. Case study, CMS organization, Health and Human Services. The challenge was to reduce the time for subsetting and cloning databases. configuration instances, are not in sync. And it can be an ongoing thing because you don't just make one clone. You have to keep making clones because you need to be making clones of current data. The good news is that the CMS created subsets, which are 1% of the production instances that are part of their 16 terabyte database. So they have 16 terabyte production instance. Now, if they made 10 clones of that, you'd have 160 terabytes. Like they actually had total savings here of 89 terabytes by reducing their non-production environment through test data management. So, really great example of the benefits of test data management going on over at CMS. So let's talk about enterprise data management system data masking. Now masking is the ability to protect sensitive data. So Inspector General and NIST 853 requirements for securing sensitive data are going to require either encryption or certainly masking, one of the two in all cases. So you cannot have sensitive classified data out in the open, and this is on all databases within the federal government. This is the law. This is a FISMA requirement, and quite honestly, we all know that the federal government overall is significantly deficient in this area. So how can we really quickly get at this sort of compliance issue? Well, data masking goes after the non-production data, which is in most cases 60 to 80% of all data. And what it does is it de-identifies or obfuscates sensitive data. Now, remember, we're in a non-production environment, which means we're doing processing and testing on this data. So you can't use encryption because you can't process an encrypted column or an encrypted field. You need to have a syntactically correct data set in order to test data. So, for instance, let's say you had a social security number. It starts with 3 digits, 324. Then there's 4 digits, and then 4 more digits, I think it is. And those digits all mean something, and there's processing that goes on against those digits. And so they've got to be syntactically correct. And what data masking does is essentially take one piece of sensitive information and replace it with another sensitive, with another actual piece of syntactically correct information, but it's just not the right information. So instead of it being your social security number, it's someone else's social security number, which tied to your name has no relevance whatsoever. And this can be done to shuffle or substitute, or you can create custom algorithms to really scramble them up. And what it means is that you can make your data safe and still be able to do testing and development on that data. So many data breaches happen because people have non-production data on their laptops and they lose their laptop. This is a perfect way to resolve that data breach circumstance. And I think at this point, from an enterprise data management standard perspective, data masking is absolutely a best practice in terms of the proper way to secure non-production data. Now, when data masking is combined with test data management, you get a neat solution called masking on the fly. So masking on the fly means that as you're creating your non-production database instance through a subsetting process such as test data management, you're automatically, because you've classified your data already, you're automatically masking all of the sensitive data. So you can be sure that every time you create a new non-production instance, all of the sensitive data in that non-production instance is automatically masked. So you have tremendous assurance that you've got a process in place which will make sure that your sensitive data is always protected. A good example of this is Nextel, which is actually just right out by right out in Virginia by the airport. Nextel had a big billing application which they were rolling out to multiple countries, and in that billing database they had credit card information, which is of course protected by PCI credit card security requirement, and so that data had to be protected. They had to move these very, very large databases into one for each country, and this was an iterative process that was happening monthly. And so for them to be able to subset and then mask the data at the central location, it provided them a very, very easy way to move more data in a secure and safe way across the rest of their business units. So the cloud is really big this year in the federal marketplace, and with FedRAMP and all of the push that federal IT professionals are getting to move to the cloud, we're seeing a lot of activity in this area. Now, Vivek Kundra, the president's CIO, released this slide. An estimated $20 billion of the federal government's $80 billion in IT spending is a potential target for migration to cloud computing solutions. I mean, that's really dramatic, and it's a good testimony to the good work at the GSA and other places to establish a compliance framework like FedRAMP, so that these sort of cloud solutions are now available to the agencies, and many agencies now are looking to find which applications are going to move to the cloud, which are going to be the first ones to go, what's the best, what type of application lends itself best to the cloud. So big activity in this area. So cloud enablement becomes a really important capability. In other words, if I have a Siebel system, but I'm going to go to the cloud with Salesforce.com, how do I migrate my Siebel data into Salesforce.com? Or if I'm going to go from PeopleSoft to Workday, or you get the idea, any sort of on-premise traditional enterprise software platform as I move to the cloud, what do I do with the, what data is going to get moved over, and what about the data that gets left behind? How am I going to access that data that gets left behind, and what am I going to do with it? So the idea here is to tier legacy application data to a cloud tier, and optimize the new cloud platform by migrating only the active data to the cloud. There's no reason why, if you get a brand new Salesforce.com system, that you need to bring all the data over from your Siebel system. As a matter of fact, that will just drive a much higher cost, a much more complex implementation for you. So why not archive the less frequently accessed data to the Solix Cloud Archive? So this is our archive in the cloud. Retire a legacy application and the data in the legacy application that you don't want to have retired all to the Solix Cloud, and provide universal access to this data for reporting and compliance through the Solix Application Portfolio Manager. So, big challenge is as this big migration happens from on-premise to cloud computing is what to do with the data. And we think we have a great solution here by identifying a cloud tier and classifying a cloud tier. And that cloud tier is defined roughly as really what your current data is. And all the other data we're going to retire or archive for you, and we can do it right into the cloud. So uh, Solix Cloud enabling solutions, this is really the ability to run everything that I've just described, not just in a traditional on-premise mode, but to run it in the cloud. And so the Solix Cloud is the deployment of all of these solutions in a cloud architecture. So in summary, I just want to wrap up here, and I'll try to leave a little bit of time for Q&A. But number one, what we're concerning ourselves here with the Solix dbms platform is it's really a comprehensive data governance platform to manage and protect application data, because this is an asset for the organization, and it should be managed accordingly. It's a single product install and repository. It's web enabled, so one Solix deployment can support an entire enterprise, support all databases, all applications running in the enterprise. All of the modules that I've described here, from archiving to application retirement, test data management, and masking, are all integrated into a single platform that can run either in the cloud or on-premise. On-premise or on demand. Support for end-to-end lifecycle management processes. So all of your compliance frameworks are going to be looking for documented information lifecycle management approaches to managing enterprise data. And the Solix EDMS suite provides the ILM framework that you need to achieve such compliance. Application portfolio management is the ability to rationalize all of these systems into an archive and maintain universal access to all of the data that's either been archived or retired. And we want to be able to deploy this software across as many different applications, whether they're out-of-the-box, off-the-shelf enterprise apps, or they're custom apps that you built internally. We want to be able to address all of those environments, regardless of database technology or hardware platform. And thank you very much to our partner, Carasoft, who carries GSA structure for us, and is our go-to-market partner here in the federal space. So at that, Christine, I think I'm pretty much wrapped up on my prepared remarks, and if there's any Q&A or anything, I would turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, John. We do have a couple questions that were submitted to the Q&A pod. Just a reminder to everybody, if you have any questions for John, to please submit them on the left-hand side of your screen. The first question we have, your cloud proposition seems in line with our strategy to move to the cloud. That said, security and compliance are of primary importance for us. So how does Solix ensure that the data is secure and compliant in the Solix cloud?
That's a tough question. So the first thing is to understand who actually is going to be the hosting provider, because really the bulk of your FedRAMP compliance requirements are going to come from there, and there are a number of well-certified hosting providers within the federal space that you probably all know of, which are going to resolve the lion's share of that, and similarly, many federal organizations operate, frankly, in a private cloud environment already, and I think it's a mistake to talk about the cloud just in thinking of it as some public cloud solution where a vendor is actually running everything. Particularly in the federal government space, what's really happening is, in many cases, is that agencies are building their own clouds, and they're running their own cloud environments. And so, in that scenario, the compliance issues, in terms of security and access, physical and type of access. These issues are going to be all part of your standard compliance that you're running initiatives for across the whole agency. So I think the biggest thing here is to look at who the hosting provider is, and look at what specific compliance issues you're going to be faced with based on the classification of data. So going through the classification exercise to start talking about, okay, what sort of retention policies are we going to be needing here? What sort of security policies are we going to be needing here? These all then need to become documented and fit into your internal compliance framework. And I think you'll find that the Solix environment is well documented in that regard, and does meet the major compliance requirements such as NIST 853 for data security I mentioned earlier. So this is not an easy question to answer in very broad terms. It really needs to be answered in very specific terms by looking at what your specific compliance issues are, given the application set that you're working with, and understanding the gap between your in-house capability and the gap between the vendor engineered solution that you're considering. And those gaps are going to be the issues that could become the focus of your deployment in terms of compliance and making sure that those issues are resolved.
Great. Thank you so much, John. The next question we have: it is important for us to access the archive data intermittently. What are the ways we can do this?
Right. So data access is absolutely critical. And as I said before, so many people are resistant to archive because the connotation of archiving is that you're going to lose access to the data. And what we want to do is we want to dispel that myth and make sure that everybody understands that when we archive data, we're really just making our production system run a lot better. We're still providing access to the archive data, and there's two ways to do it. One is through native access. So let's say you're running an Oracle e-business suite application. You've got a list of reports using Oracle Discover. This is how everyone's trained. You're only archiving one application, and you don't want to deal about retraining anyone. So in that case, there's no reason why you can't just use the native Oracle Discover query environment to access your data, whether it's in the archive or in your production instance. You use the same one. We call that native access. And then the second way is what I talked about earlier, which is the Oracle Application Portfolio Manager, which is a single query environment, runs in a browser, and allows you to query an entire portfolio of archived or decommissioned applications. And if you think about the case study that I mentioned with Honeywell, they had hundreds of systems that they retired. So how many query environments are you going to be forced to maintain if you have native access for hundreds of different environments? You need to maintain a query environment for every single one, which would be a huge task, huge challenge. So when you're looking at an enterprise portfolio, having universal access really is better handled with a solution like Solix APM, which is really just a ODBC, JDBC interface. We're going to retire or archive your data. We're going to compress it, maybe as much as 90% to reduce space, and then you query that archive with the Solix Application Portfolio Manager.
All right, great. Thank you so much, John. We have time for one last question. Does your data masking satisfy NIST NIST 800-53 type compliance requirements?
Right. So NIST 853 is that's really the data protection framework for data security, and and it's a multi-part discussion on how to secure information, and it involves access control, and it involves de-identification of data such as I described through our masking solution. And yes, we believe that for non-production data, data masking, will meet 853 type compliance requirements.
Great. Thank you so much, John.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. At this time, I'd like to point out that a few questions are now posted on your screen. We ask that you please answer them for us to better understand your needs. I would like to thank all of our participants, as well as John and Solix Technologies, for being with us today. We hope our webcast has been helpful for you and your organization. If you have any further questions or would like to request more information, please feel free to contact the Solix Technology team at Carasoft. Our contact information is displayed on your screen. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.